two things are crucial. One is to make the private sector know that we have these opportunities. And therefore the SAGCOD, the Southern Agricultural Development Corridor that we have come up with recently, it cropped up during the World Economic Forum here. And then we drove it now all the way up to Davos. It's simply to let the community, the international community, know that we have the opportunities here. And we picked up that Southern Corridor deliberately because of the good opportunities that are within that corridor in terms of rain, in terms of rivers, in terms of good land, etc., etc. Okay? So, it's a way of getting this message across. Of course, within we've got clusters here and there, depending on what one would like to do. If you want to do livestock, fine. If you want to do agriculture in the sense of cultivating products, fine. Fruits inclusive. So the real message across that I'm trying to get across to my colleagues here is just to let them know that we have these opportunities. Yes, we are going to face challenges here and there, and as you correctly said, we have to balance. We have to look for this land which is almost empty for purpose of investors, but at the same time, see what these other small farmers can do in order to take opportunity of whatever is going to come up from the private sector. And in this, we have already started getting a bit of some experience in Morogoro, where the contract farming has worked so well. You can see things are changing there. Farmers are becoming more and more, finding it a very, very good policy that we can also replicate in other parts. So basically, it's an area that I'm very confident. We think we can make something out of that.
On that same note, you talked about empowering of your people and creating incentives. Could you just broaden a little bit about those two key issues in line with agriculture? This is something land reform, always when you say land reform, the alarm bells go off for investors. They've clearly got some examples in the region, Zimbabwe. I'm not saying it's suggesting that, but certainly it does ring the alarm bells and say, do we need to think a bit more? Is the government thinking about what the incentives will be and what kind of guarantees will be given for this development to be accelerated?
Okay. No, I think let's come back to the issue of empowering our people first, because that is crucial. Of course, we had to set in first the policy on empowerment, which we have at the moment. Okay? Now, through the investments that are going to be created, it's also possible to create a mechanism through a dialogue where Tanzanians can also participate through the land, which is public land, land of the government on behalf of the people. So a mode that will probably give you a chance to a form of some shares from the government side, but on behalf of the people or directly through the people. It's a way that one can look into as an empowerment area. But more important is for the private sector in Tanzania to be enticed now to take the role into investments in this particular field. But it, of course, must be coupled now with the government's efforts in terms of guarantees that are probably required so that it becomes more effective. But apart from that, as you correctly said, the land tenure system must also be very clear. Okay? Of course, the Zimbabwe way is a different case. Our land tenure system here is very clear. It's a 33-year term, 99-year term. Okay? We don't have freehold here system like in other parts of the world. And we think this is good because it gives us time and opportunity all the time to put questions to whoever is an investor. What have you done in the last 33 years? Okay? And what have you done after 66? And therefore 99? And therefore whether we need to renew it or not. See? And there is a lot of room for discussions and that can enable somebody to feel comfortable all the same. So it's an area that we are going to look into so that whatever will come out from the discussions as a worrying area, an area that needs to be looked critically, we can always sit down and see what best we can do.
I think I'd like to open up the floor now. This is your opportunity. There were a couple of questions in the morning, and this is your chance to raise it with the Prime Minister. One of the key questions that came up was the quality of the bureaucracy. It's a major stumbling block. And some of the tenders that go in either get lost, takes a number of years to process, and in the meantime, there's lack of transparency as well. These are some of the areas of concerns that have been raised earlier as well. I know you mentioned that you are going to improve governance and transparency is still very much high up, but what is the government going to do to make it different this time? What is going to be so different in the second term?
Yeah, it's one of these areas that the government is really putting up a lot of its understanding of the problem and trying to sort it out. Bureaucracy. Well, bureaucracies on the one hand are inevitable if you want to move, but what we don't like is when it tends now to be a hindrance towards development, and that's where we get worried. Now, I think the problem basically is it has got its own genesis because Tanzania came up with these reforms within just a few years back. Yeah. The bureaucrats was never made to think in the business mindset. You know, it's the past all the time, and this is what we still have. Now, this is why I said we need to do a lot of reforms in this particular area. Of course, when we got these comments from the donor community as well as business community, we sat down together with the business community trying to find out exactly what are the bottlenecks. We've already identified all the bottlenecks, yeah? And therefore what we did under the Chief Secretary's leadership was to come up now with a roadmap, okay, which we've already drawn it up, the map that is also known to the President, taking up every area which is a bottleneck and giving ourselves time during which we must unbottle that problem. That's why we decided to call it a roadmap towards unbottling some of these hitches that are purely bureaucratic. Yeah? Licensing of even small things can take so many days when in fact you go to another country, it takes on a short while. Why? It's because of the inbuilt mechanisms that were long, old type of systems. But also we had to push in a lot of effort now trying to make sure that systems now work through the ICT technologies so that we can speed up things rather than depending on manual exercises that are no longer relevant today. Also, in short, what I'm saying is at least we've realized the areas, we've identified all these areas, we have a roadmap already, and that roadmap is now what is currently being followed up, trying to deal with these headaches that were identified.
Thank you. Can I...
Thank you, Chairperson. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, Your Excellency. My name is Stavros Nikolaou, and I'm from an organization called Aspen Pharmacare, who are a 60% investor in Shelley's, the largest pharmaceutical player in the region. My question, Excellency, is one that relates specifically to attracting foreign direct investment in Tanzania, and also how you can, I guess, stimulate your manufacturing base. What we have found, particularly at a public procurement level, pharmaceuticals in the region and specifically in your country, is that there's very little incentive to manufacture locally. Very little consideration is given to the economic value add that manufacturing and skills and all the up and downstream activities that go with all of that. Very little consideration is given for that economic value add that goes back into the economy. And it seems to be that things are just purely price driven, which lends itself to huge propensity and, I guess, reliance on imports. And that in turn has all the other knock-on effects. So I guess to summarize and bring it back to a question is, are we able to engage bilaterally with the government to try and establish some type of preferences so that we can stimulate further local manufacture? We don't expect any special favors or anything like that, or we don't expect to cost the fiscus anymore because there is a value that goes back to the fiscus. Are we able to have that type of bilateral engagement with your government? Thank you.
Yeah, as I said, the president deliberately decided to put investments under my office. And one thing that we have started looking into is precisely the area that is pointing out today. The manufacturing industries and the incentives relating to manufacturing. It's a complex area, but I think surmountable too. We're in a competitive world and want things to operate on a level that allows competition between each other. But it's also true that the cry has been, well, for some of these manufacturing industries, particularly in the country, feel threatened by imports from outside, and therefore the need for some protection of some sort. Now we are working on that one, but we want to be very, very careful with it, okay, so that we don't just give an undue protection, and in the course of that, you know, you disturb the whole essence of what competition really means. So we are going to work on that problem, and we are going, of course, to involve the stakeholders in this particular area, so that we try and see what best can be done, maybe case by case, or if we can manage on a pro rata basis, but depending on the kind of mechanism that we are going to build into the incentive packages. At the moment, it's an area that is not very clear, and therefore I think I agree with him that we need to look into it.
This is an important issue. I think how the competition that's been rising from the emerging markets, particularly Chinese manufacturing goods, and it's an area which it'd be interesting to know if you've got a view on it, about whether you would be looking at it as a unit of EAC, because it's an issue also affecting Kenya, Uganda, Rwanda, all the neighboring countries. It's a global issue. On top of that, it's a question of not just unable to remain competitive, but also counterfeit goods that are flooding the markets. It's just an added headache for the government to think about. Is it an area that you're also considering?
Of course, under the EAC, and for that matter, even SADC, we have protocols generally that give these countries an opportunity of protecting to some level their own industries in the country, you know, by raising some of these custom duties in certain areas. But it's something that we need to sit down within the framework of the East Africa community, but also within the SADC, okay, regional cooperation, and seriously look into it, so that we don't become a dumping ground, but more important, we don't kill our manufacturing industries because of what is coming from outside, you see. And of course, it gets more complicated, because if you don't have a strong customs body, which is actually the entry point, that also creates another problem. For some of these products may be coming through dubious ways, you know, not necessarily through the right channels, and therefore they escape the eyes of the authorities. But all these have got to be looked into and sit together, find a way really that we think can be done, even if it means raising more customs duties to some areas, so that we keep at least the internal industries safe. We have to think of that.